We're live. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and those of you still on the fence figuring things out, welcome back to another episode of Derailed, courtesy of Arcaicskidz. I'm, of course, your host, Arcaicskidz, and we have Mark Schneider back on to talk Green Nuclear Future, Part 3. What's up, Mark?
You know, just enjoying my life. I wore an appropriate colored shirt today. You know, green, to talk about green nuclear, so it'll be fun.
Nice. Got someone over here trying to show me his phone. Like, I don't think you're live. It's like, well, there's a delay. Like, that happens. So. All right, man. So we talked a lot last week about just the overall stuff. One of the things that I saw this week, which actually angered me quite a bit, was that the Biden administration actually wants to shut down some nuclear power plants and also make it more difficult to build new ones. So I wasn't planning on talking about that because I just learned about it a few days ago. I figured you probably have more information.
I actually don't. I mean, I've just with my work schedule and all that, I haven't been focused too much on what's going on in the news. You know, just to, kind of let everyone understand, about nuclear energy is that the U.S. designs, we're not like the Canadian designs that can refuel them on. We have to shut the reactors down to refuel them. So literally last night, I was up all night working, and we're in an outage. We literally started the outage last night when we shut the reactor down so we can do our 18-month refueling on one of the two units that are where I work. So literally my life has been focused on, being prepared for that, thinking about that. There's preparation, not just, from a work aspect, but I'm be working, by law, by federal regulation, I can only work, I have to work 1 day on, or it's like 4 days on, 1 day off. And it's going to be 12-hour shifts night, an hour commute to get to where I work. So my life has been focused primarily around, making that happen, focusing for that. So I haven't really been focusing too much on the nuclear news, but it really doesn't surprise me too much because I think inside the Biden administration, you've got competing factions, which the same thing occurred in the Trump administration. There was, factions that were very pro-oil and there were very pro-nuclear factions. And the Biden administration, you're going to see the same thing. And, you got your pro, renewable energy, aka your pro-oil group, with versus your pro-nuclear group. So it doesn't surprise me. There are some plants that probably do need to shut down just because of age, equipment, where they're located. When you look at our nuclear reactors in the U.S., they're extremely large scale, and the environmental impact from an extremely large reactor is huge, right? And I'm not just talking about it from an aspect of land, but you're putting a lot of heat into your whatever your source is. So you're looking at a river, a lake, the ocean, and what do you do? How do you dissipate that heat? And how much can you actually support that? Do you want to raise your river by 20 degrees? Probably not. I can't put 4 nuclear reactors on this river. There are methods. You see the big giant,
just pour ice in it, Mark.
Yeah, just pour ice in it. Yeah, because there's no energy required to make ice.
None.
By the way, that is great. You just described the renewable argument. Well, you could just do this. Like, you understand that you require energy for all this stuff. There's the law of conservation of energy says that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only converted in form. Now, and then there's a law of mass. Mass can neither be created nor destroyed. And then you get into nuclear power, and we just say, well, actually, I can take mass and turn it into energy. Sorry.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I just learned the other day what makes lightning, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I got called out on Twitter by another engineer who I offered to come on the show because they say you're wrong, and that wind and solar are the future, and they're going to come explain to me why. So that should be interesting. We'll see how that one goes.
Ask them how they're going to store it, and they're going to say batteries, and you're going to look at them and go, so what is the environmental impact of mining those batteries?
Yeah,
because I think you would
how many children are you willing to enslave?
Yeah, one, and you would ask the question of how much or as far as the mining, right? What is the impact of mining?
Yeah.
So And now let's put this into perspective here. So I'm going to talk about nuclear weapons because it's something that everyone gets.
Right.
Right. So Little Boy, that was the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. It contained 65 kilograms of uranium-235. Right. You figure that's about 1%. So to mine that uranium, we had to mine 100 times that. So we had to mine about 6,500 kilograms of uranium. That's not a lot, right? 65 kilograms, 150 pounds. I can pick that up, right? So when you look at that from a perspective of, that destroyed a city,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That small amount. Now, when you're looking, when you get large scale nuclear, you're looking at, 80,000 kilograms of uranium. Now that's, relatively low enriched uranium. So we don't have to mine, 100 times that. We have to mine basically 4 or 5 times that to get to that amount as far as the low enriched uranium. If you're talking a naturally enriched uranium like the CANDU reactor of Canada, you want 80,000 kilograms, you mine 80,000 kilograms, right? These are very small numbers by comparison, right? When you put it into perspective and you're looking at the hundreds of thousands of tons, and I'm talking in kilograms here, right? Hundreds of thousands of tons of lithium that have to be mined, of cobalt that has to be mined, right? To produce these batteries, there's a huge quantity and a huge environmental impact in that mining. Now, is there an environmental impact with nuclear mining, with uranium mining or thorium mining when we get there? Yes, I'm not denying that, which is funny because those are the comments I get. No. That's actually accounted for in the cost of nuclear. It's accounted for in the deaths. And that's the thing that's crazy is a lot of people don't realize that when they calculate the deaths for nuclear, they're including the whole process. They're including if a guy,
they're including from mining all the way through. Yeah.
But wind and solar doesn't do that, right?
Well, I mean, we wouldn't want to mess up our numbers now.
Yeah, I mean, here's a statistic. The UK loses 14 people a year just from people falling off of wind turbines.
Wow. And I don't think we lose that many from nuclear.
The US has. It's here. I actually work at the deadliest nuclear plant. It hasn't had a death since the 80s. No.
So super dangerous.
Yeah, super dangerous, right? And the deaths were all related to. There was a couple of there was electrocution where a guy drilled into a wall, hit a cable, and it electrocuted him. And then the guy went to pull him off, and the guy was still energized. And
it arced him, so got him. Yeah.
And then that was the biggest one. And then there was a guy there was a group of people that they had a piping rupture, high temperature, high pressure water, and it just scalded them to death. So those sort of accidents occur. Those actual accidents can occur. Those are industrial accidents. They're not, nuclear accidents per se. But we include the industrial aspects as accidents as part of our numbers. But no one's talking about the people that are dying in the manufacturing of wind turbines or in solar farms. They don't talk about that.
Right.
They just want to imagine to say, well, it doesn't. There's no chance for death, right? It doesn't pollute, therefore it doesn't kill. Is there justification? And
well, I find that interesting because I know that a statistic that I found was that the number one cause of death from nuclear power, according to the industry, is truck driving. It's transferring the ore to the smelting area or whatever, to the processing facility and having accidents. That's the most dangerous part. As far as loss of life, that's the most dangerous side of it or sector.
And if you look at any industry, the number one cause of death is probably car accidents, period.
Yeah.
That's
just transfer. And that includes police. A lot of people think cops are getting shot. They're not. They're dying in car wrecks.
Yeah. Well, they go into these high-speed chases, and that's just.
Well, that's not usually what causes it. It's not usually what gets them. What generally gets them is just your regular everyday car wreck that would be absolutely normal to anyone. Obviously car wreck's not normal when it happens to you, but your mind is capable of going back through the motions and going, oh, okay, this happened.
Well,
that's the same thing.
And then ask yourself, you're looking at a police officer, right? They cover a 24-hour 365 days a year, 7 days a week schedule. So
Yeah.
how much of their accidents are actually fatigue related?
Probably quite a bit, and they also don't wear their seatbelts.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah.
They don't wear their seatbelts, and that's a lot of it too. But that's not what we're. The point that I was trying to make there was that the number one cause of nuclear death is truck driving. And you say that, and people go, "Oh, what? Like they got like radiation poisoning, moving the stuff?" No,
like they got in an accident and died.
Go ahead.
Remember, I was talking about the quantity of material that we're extracting by volume is extremely small. So therefore, right, if you expand that number and you're going into lithium, cobalt mining, even coal mining, right?
Right.
Probably transportation is the number one cause of death in all these industries. But how much more do you have to transport?
Oh, yeah,
right?
a lot more. So your risk assessment goes way up in that situation. That's just basic mathematics. I mean, I understand we're in a weird world now where 2 + 2 can be 5, but whatever.
I can actually prove you that 2 = 1, by the way.
Okay. So I put out a poll on Twitter. You obviously don't understand how a poll works because you responded with yes. you didn't pick an option. You just said yes. So I want to talk about that. We did discuss thorium somewhat. I kind of wanted to wait to see if Magnus could get in here. He's obviously he's fighting his computer right now. Okay. But so let's talk about plutonium first. And what is do any of these fuels produce more energy for less cost?
I got to process this because
I'll try to rephrase. Do any of them? Yeah. Well, I'll try to rephrase it. Is one of the fuels easier to cause fission than the other two?
Yeah. These are very complex questions.
Well, that's why you're here.
The easiest fuel to use is uranium-235, which is what we use today. Okay. That's the easiest fuel because it exists now as a fuel. I pull it up out of the ground, 0.7% of all the uranium that we mine. We can pull that out, we can enrich it, and we can use it in reactors today. It is the simplest fuel to use, right? It's also the least abundant. And now, if I use a pure uranium reactor or a pure uranium-235 reactor, the waste profile is going to be essentially the same as a plutonium reactor, as a thorium reactor. The waste that everyone talks about is because we have a blended fuel that we use in our reactors that is uranium-235 and uranium-238. And what we have left over is this, that's where the large quantity comes from. We're only consuming 5%, less than 5% of our fuel. So therefore, basically, we have 95% of our energy. That means that we've got 20 times the waste. And this is the argument that thorium group comes in there saying, well, thorium doesn't produce as much waste.
Okay.
Technically true, but it's not entirely true. And I liked when I compare them, I compare the three fuels together. And I say a pure uranium reactor, a pure plutonium reactor, and a pure thorium reactor. And as far as experience goes, we obviously have the most experience with the uranium-235 reactor. That's the fuel that the United States Navy uses. It's the fuel that 458 of the 460 reactors around the planet use. There is some plutonium generated in all of these reactors that is then consumed. So it's not like we're not using plutonium in them, but we're primarily a uranium-235 reactor. And the thing is that we can blend these fuels. We can use them together. So that's why I said yes. Now, I did reply, and my choice is plutonium. And I like plutonium because I can burn the waste directly. Now, one of the things that I can do, and going into that thorium discussion, is that whether thorium is viable as a fuel or not, no engineer has been able to say, yes, we can make this work, that isn't a thorium advocate or is an anti-thorium advocate. Right. Gotcha. So I don't have anyone telling me one way or the other. And think it's that we don't know. I honestly don't think we've run enough.
Do we have any thorium reactors that are operational at scale?
No, the only thorium reactor, the only thorium powered reactor that the U.S. ever built was Shippingport, and its third core was a blend of uranium-235, plutonium, and then they put in thorium, and then it basically went towards more of a thorium style reactor at the end of its life. And it was a commercial reactor, but the government had a big hand in the operation of this thing. It didn't use the low enriched fuels. It used high enriched fuels. Admiral Rickover, in charge of naval reactors, was in charge of overseeing the project, which was completely in violation of the Atomic Energy Act or Atomic Energy Commission, because it's a land-based reactor.
The U.S. violated some treaty or something? Well, yeah. It's crazy.
I mean, the law was in effect when it went into operation, and by law, the United States Army should have been in charge of it because it was a land-based reactor that was not associated with naval reactors, right? So if you have a land-based design that's going to go into a submarine aircraft carrier, destroyer, or whatever, then the Navy would be in charge of it. If it was a land-based reactor, the Army would be in charge of it. Whether the Navy was operating or not, they were in charge of the oversight of all that. I way tangent on that. But one of the things that I foresee with thorium, and this is what I really like about it, is that we can use thorium to extend uranium-235.
Okay.
So if we blend our fuels, this is where thorium, I think, is its superpower. Is that by putting thorium with the uranium-235 reactor, I can basically use that, because going back to how neutrons are generated, the splitting of a uranium-235 atom generates 2.48 neutrons. And I need one to keep the reaction going, and I have to manage those other about 1.5 neutrons. Well, if I have thorium in there, it can absorb those neutrons and act as what we call a poison in the industry. And it can then turn into uranium-233, which is a fuel which operates somewhere in the low fast spectrum as energy. I talked about this previously. Fast being the high energy, thermal being low energy. It operates kind of between them in its wider range. So this is a huge benefit to thorium. So I'm going to sound like a thorium evangelist for a little bit because I see huge benefits in this. So I mix these fuels together, but I think thorium by itself isn't really viable. Thorium actually can't even work. You use thorium in a reactor, it doesn't do anything because it doesn't fission without without a seed. But if we can blend these, and I can basically make my uranium-235 last 10 times as long, right? Now my reactor core lasts longer. I don't have to refuel it as often, right? Instead of refueling it every year and a half, maybe refuel it every 8 years. Right. So that's saving in cost. It keeps my reactors online longer. I'm shutting down for, other equipment issues. And I don't have to necessarily do these giant maintenance packages that involve ripping this whole reactor apart, putting it back together. So it may change the way that we operate these nuclear reactors, and that's one of the huge benefits. The other benefit I see is that when you're talking with a plutonium-based reactor, right? If I mix plutonium and thorium together, plutonium can be the seed. It generates 2.91 neutrons, almost 3, and we have to manage those other 2. Well, uranium-238 is the seed that becomes plutonium-239, so I could put it in that. But we have already mined out this uranium with a little bit of plutonium in it from just operating in the nuclear reactor, and we could extend that with thorium. So I like the blended fuels, and that to me is something that's fascinating. And if we want to say that thorium, there's a thorium reactors and they're burning nuclear waste, whatever, I don't care. I mean, technically, it's really I think the plutonium is based on what I've researched, what I understand is that the plutonium is making the thorium viable, not thorium making the spent nuclear fuel consumption viable.
Okay, I got you.
So I think that's the big thing is that the thorium evangelists they want to make these claims, and there's some truth to it, but the evangelists are going really far on this stuff, and it's like, reel it back a little bit. Let's be a little
One of
more
those things
truthful.
where they get some information and just go nutty with it.
Yeah, which is, everything, right? That engineer
Right.
talking about wind and solar, right?
Yeah.
He's got a little bit of information, but he doesn't understand how a grid works. I guarantee he doesn't understand how a grid works.
Right. Well, I invited him on the show because I'm like, if you're going to make a statement like that, then you should be able to back it up with science. And if you can't, maybe you should stop talking. That's kind of how I looked at it. But so I don't know exactly when that'll happen. But I don't like I do honestly say that the future of energy, green energy, is nuclear. But that's because there's almost 70 years of proof at this point of its viability.
Yeah, I mean, we've been powering. I mean, 1950s. So yeah, I mean, we're 70 years definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, and there have been problems, but that exists with everything, right? Every technology that when you iterate it, you have problems. And for some reason, my industry has been forced to basically state that our problems, we have to keep talking about them. We have to say that, hey, there are these problems. I'm like, do you realize how many planes have blown up in test flights? Right? How many cars have just
if you think about it, ask Elon Musk how many spaceships he shot up actually made it to space.
Yeah.
And how many blew up.
I mean, we built 7 space shuttles and we blew up 2 of them.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's crazy. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The US nuclear industry, right? If you look at it all, you're talking the labs, the Navy, the Army, we built, probably 500 reactors in the United States.
Yeah.
More, maybe even close to 700 or 800 reactors. And we literally blew up 1.
That's what I'm saying. It's crazy to me. Yeah.
Right? We've destroyed 2.
Right.
We've damaged several others that were then, repaired and operated. And then we intentionally blew up 1. To test it.
That's the one that gets me the most is that we intentionally blew 1 up. And you're like, well,
it was the borax. Now we didn't blow up the nuclear aspect of it, but we tested the containment structure of it. You're like, all right, we're done operating this thing. Let's see what happens if we pretend to have a nuclear accident and hey, everything works great.
Yeah.
I mean, we did that with submarines too. They just freaking install things that cause steam line breaks and steam shoots throughout the entire engine room. You see chairs flying past the camera. It's like, okay, got it.
You're like, oops, my bad.
I mean, yeah.
I wanted to touch more on your what you were saying about blending the fuels, because that's what a lot of the reading I've been doing when it's not, sometimes you can read these research papers or you can read these papers, rather they're diatribes or whatever, and it's within the first paragraph, you already know if this thing is like, who wrote it. You understand kind of their premise. If they're going to be like 100% like, no, thorium's the only thing. Like, you can tell like very rapidly. And I'll usually just go, I don't need to read this because I've read plenty of these now. Like, doesn't matter who it is. But that's what a lot of the research that I've read, one of them coming out of MIT was that thorium by itself is probably not very viable because, like you said, you need a seed, but it's extremely viable if we were to blend it with the other fuels. And so I find that interesting. My question would be, can we blend all 3 together?
Yes.
Or so we can blend plutonium, uranium, and thorium together. Would that give us an extension like you were talking about with the thorium so we don't have to refuel as often? Or
So I'm going back to shipping port, and this is what I love about shipping port is that it used all 3 fuels.
Okay.
Right. So it was designed to be a plutonium reactor, but didn't have any plutonium when they initially operated it. So it used uranium to get to be the initial seed, which then created plutonium. And then when they refueled it, they put in that plutonium was then used to be the seed for the next batch of uranium-238 that then became plutonium. And then in the final reactor core, I mean, this thing operated, by the way, this thing operated for like 30 years, 30 or 40 years. So when I'm saying refueling, right, because we extended the fuel, right, it was creating its own fuel as it was operating, it was able to, only require 3 refuelings. And in the
30 years?
Yeah. Initial fueling,
awesome.
First refuel, second refuel, and the second refuel, the third fueling, and final fueling, same one, right? Those are all the same thing, same thing 3 times. They replaced, there was plutonium left over from, the previous cycle, and they basically brought in, and there was some uranium still in the uranium-235, and then they brought in thorium as the final that they then operated off of both, uranium, had uranium in there, had plutonium in there, and thorium in there. So,
oh wow, that's awesome.
So there is a benefit to operating off of multiple fuels. Now, the great thing that thorium has that when you blend thorium with a uranium design, a uranium-235 design, or a plutonium design, is that thorium operates in that wide range. And this is one of the huge benefits that I see with thorium, is that by being in that wide range, is that they can operate in the fast spectrum where plutonium operates. So I can design a reactor coolant, which is going, pick a reactor coolant. This is where your molten salt reactors, your, liquid metal reactors, your gas cooled reactors work great, because I can stay up at this, keep the energy of the neutrons really high, and I can use thorium to extend my plutonium. And then it also operates down in the higher energy thermal, lower energy overall. And so I can operate down there, so I can extend my uranium-235 fuel. And so we can do it, so if I want a water-cooled reactor that uses thorium, I can extend my fuel cycle out, and that's a huge benefit. And I think that's where it is. And there's a design that's out there that's going to would use all 3 fuels, because it uses an 80-20 blend of uranium that makes a 20% of the fuel, and then it has thorium as the remaining fuel. That 20% uranium, which ends up being about 4 to 5% of the total fuel, is your initial seed. It's going to generate a little bit of plutonium, but it's primarily generating uranium-233 from that thorium. And that's how you extend that fuel up from an 18-month fuel cycle to an 8-year fuel cycle. So that's an example of where blending a fuel is amazing, right? And then when you're talking from a waste perspective, I'm generating basically 1/4 the waste, or 1/5 the waste. And everyone talks about the waste. Well, now I have this smaller amount of waste that's generated. There's still, by the way, a lot of energy in that fuel when you're using it, right? But instead of only using 3 to 4%, if I'm using it, now I'm using 25, 35% of that fuel. That's a much better, fuel economy, if you will.
I got you. Okay. So go ahead.
And the great thing about that is that I can use that in existing reactors. So I'm not having to build it.
So you don't have to retrofit anything or do anything different. You can just go with it.
I'm just using a standard fuel assembly that would fit into a reactor, and I could install that into a nuclear reactor. And now my reactors, are generating way less waste. They're operating for longer. I don't know where that fuel is at. That 20% blend of uranium, it's called HALEU. HALEU.
I was reading
high assay low enriched uranium.
That was in the MIT paper that I was reading the other day. So
because it's anything low enriched, anything below 5%, and it gets into that. When you start talking about enriching uranium, well, Iran's enriching, they're getting up above 60%, and everyone goes, "Oh my gosh, it's closer to weapons." Like, no, it's really not closer to weapons.
It's not close to weapons at all.
No, it's
very different technology.
Very, very different technology, and that's the part that's frustrating. It's frustrating from my aspect, is that we operate way differently than the nuclear weapons world.
Yeah. We're gonna do two quick questions here, and then we're gonna do a public service thing for the. You see it running across the bottom there, veteranspromisecat.com. You know, everyone should check that out. But we'll have the guy that runs that, Luke, will be on in just a minute to maybe even ask Mark a question about nuclear if he wants to. So two quick questions here. One, I really like how you said you could extend that fuel. And the reason for that is I do actually have a mining expert coming on very soon, because nice. That's the number one question I keep getting is what's the environmental impact of the mining operation via nuclear? Well, any mining really, it's all basically the same. Whatever you're mining changes, but that's all. And so I have a mining expert so the audience can know that we will be discussing that. But if you can extend that fuel at that much, what you're talking about, well, there you go. That's going to change the entire game on the mining operation as well. You know, we're not, whatever the impact is currently, it wouldn't be that anymore. I mean, we'd be able to cut it down. I mean, at least what, by 2/3?
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's just from the uranium mining aspect. Now you have to switch over to more of the thorium mining, right? Now, and thorium is obviously much more abundant. And you know, I can just literally you walk outside, pick up a handful of dirt. There's thorium.
You just pick up dirt. There's thorium. Yeah.
Yeah. So the ability to find thorium and extract it is, from what I understand, easier. So that's a
my understanding is there's a lot of places where you can be like, I don't like that hill in that spot. So you just take it out and you're good. You can just take all that and go use the thorium in it.
Yeah, and that would be a huge benefit. I mean, I know thorium is extremely abundant.
Right.
And like you said, you know, if I'm reducing the impact of that uranium mining, and then the other thing too is that when you're talking, you know, with these blended fuels, and you know, this is where we could potentially use nuclear waste, is that if I am blending, say, you know, previous, you know, nuclear fuel with thorium, I might have every other fuel rod in there could be a mix of this little bit of uranium-235, some plutonium in there, uranium-238, and then add in thorium, and now I'm, you know, recycling my waste.
Right, exactly.
In a current reactor, and you know,
well, and because go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's exactly what we're saying is, you know, any way to extend it, right? Making that reactor last longer, making that fuel cycle last longer is going to be beneficial. And then the longer the fuel, the more of the fuel we put into the reactor that we consume, 80,000 kilograms for this standard 1 megawatt reactor. You know, right now the material we're consuming is less than 5% of that. Do the quick math, that's what, 4,000 kilograms, right? So if now I can consume 1/3 of it, now I'm looking at, you know, what is that? That's, you know, 23,000, you know, 27,000 kilograms of fuel that I'm consuming. You know, so 27,000 versus 3,000, right? So now my overall weight has gone way down, right? My overall volume has gone way down. And instead of having, you know, and if you do a satellite image, if you go look at satellite, you can see the nuclear waste in the casks, and you'll see that that's like an acre.
We're going to get into that. We are actually going to wait for the second question. We're going to go into our public service thing. So I'm actually going to run a quick video for everyone to watch. And then when we come back on, you'll have Luke and Mark back with you. And they can, Luke can get his grift on. And then if he has a question for Mark, he can ask it. So we'll be right back, guys. You're going. You're live.
Hi, my name's Luke Reinhold with Veterans Promise Kept PTSD Ride. What we do is we're helping a Vietnam vet fulfill a foxhole promise to go coast to coast in a covered wagon. The story starts in 1967 when Jesse Morton and Ray Cropper joined the United States Army from a Pennsylvania horse farm. During the Tet Offensive of '68, they were taking heavy fire and made a foxhole promise to go coast to coast in a covered wagon if they ever got home from Vietnam. Unfortunately, Ray didn't make it home. So 29 years ago, Jesse built a wagon and took a team of Belgian draft horses and headed east. He was on the trail for 100 days straight and made it all the way to the wall in D.C. and then did a raised graveside at Beverly National Cemetery in New Jersey. So he made the East Coast. In 1991, when I was in Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm, I came back and needed some help. Jesse took me under his wing and got me the help I needed, so I'm still alive today. So I owe Jesse everything. We were out camping one time, and I asked him, I said, "Why haven't you fulfilled your promise to Ray?" And he said, "Well, I'm 78 years old." And I told him, "Jesse, that's no excuse because my wife and I hired him to put a deck on our house with a friend of his because my health is bad." He said, "Well, it's the money." So we asked him, if you had the money, would you do the trip? And he said, in a heartbeat. Now we were camping at a reenactment, and there are a few hundred people there. We woke up the next morning, there was $100 in 20s sitting outside our tent. So now we're obligated to do the trip. We left St. Louis 3 years ago and headed from St. Louis west to Belleville, Kansas. That's 433 miles. Since then, Jesse's complications of Agent Orange is tearing him up and he can't travel anymore. So myself, Rusty Fritz, our wrangler, Brian, another civilian, and George left Belleville, Kansas last year. When we got to Smith Center, Kansas, we picked up Tony Skidmore, and he made our rest of our guys. We went from Belleville, Kansas to Colorado Springs 2 years ago. We got COVIDed last year, so this year we started April 12th in Cimarron, New Mexico, and headed west. We made it from Cimarron up to the Golden Eagle RV Park in Eagles Nest and hosted by Nathan and Lisa. From there, we went to Taos and then to Chama. And now we're here in Fruitland, New Mexico. If you guys can, this is all run on donations. If you go to the link on the bottom of the page scrolling by, veteranspromisekept.com, and hit the donate button. Or if you want to follow our trip, you can go on Facebook to Veterans Promise Kept PTSD Ride. We try to post every day, live feeds, photos, comments, and where we're going to be and where we're at now. Guess that's about it. Does anybody have any questions? Mark, I guess that's a no.
I guess not.
Okay. Well, he's going to get Austin.
So what military police unit were you with?
The 1137th out of South St. Louis, at Jefferson Barracks.
Yeah, I'm a Navy guy, but when I deployed for Operation Iraqi Freedom, I was part of the 16th Military Police Brigade Airborne. So. Oh,
nice.
Yeah. So in fact, actually, my guest speaker when I got my commission to become an officer was Colonel Chambliss, who was the deputy CID. He was my brigade commander when I was out there. So
yeah,
I have a great love for the military police. So
nice. Okay, we've got 4 out of 5 branches. I'm Army. Tony Skidmore is Army. We've got Russ Oliver is United States Marine Corps. We have Dave Hockett, United States Navy, and Randy Fritz is United States Air Force. Most of us are 100% disabled veterans. So we have McDaniel with us and Rusty Fritz, our Wrangler, and their job is to keep us upright and going. We only travel for 4 weeks a year, and we could travel like Jesse did 100 days straight, but the VA only gives you enough medication for a month at a time. So that's why we do 4 weeks. I tell you what, when I got back from the war, I was really cynical. I was done with humans. And these trips have refreshed my thoughts on the human race. Even with all the craziness out there today, we have people coming out of the woodwork to help us and to cheer us on our trip.
That's amazing. And I mean, I appreciate what you're doing. I actually am PTSD diagnosed, so I appreciate everything you're doing to bring awareness to this. I mean, mine is relatively mild, but I know that finding what you can do to focus on something that is positive is such a big aspect to it. So I appreciate what you're doing. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. The first year, Jesse said that the trip will mean something different to everybody, and I told him he was full of it. But it ends up, I'm the CEO for Dogs That Help out of High Ridge, Missouri, and we provide service dogs to disabled veterans and first responders for free. And on this trip, our trip 2 years ago, we placed 2 service dogs, one in Kansas, one in Colorado with disabled vets, and got 49 veterans the help they needed with the service officers with the VA. We're also raising awareness for 2 Love equine assistance programs out of Lathrop, Missouri, and they do horse therapy for disabled vets and are in troubled children. And that's Rusty Fritz's outfit.
Yeah. If you let me know that I'll be coming back on now.
Okay, Austin will be coming back on here in just a second.
That's fine.
Oh, get up. Cool. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Luke.
Cool. Oh, that's all right. Don't worry about it. Sorry about that, guys. That's a first go on this one here, trying to do something like that. Anyway, so everyone, it's running there in the banner there, veteranspromisekept.com. Go try to help them out if you can. Check them out on Facebook. I believe they have a page there that you can check them out. And now we will go back to our regularly scheduled programming. So thanks for doing that there, Mark. Right quick, I appreciate you doing that. Okay, we'll jump right into that second question that I had. You were talking about if we blend those fuels, you're going to be able to get a lot more life out of all of it because it's a form of recycling.
Yep.
One of the things that we had discussed was the Aurora project was going to be able to use recycled fuel or spent fuel in a way, whatever, and get more out of that fuel. Would they still be able to do that with that blended fuel? Would there be enough left for them to be able to access that and use it?
So I don't know what their specific design, and when I speak with these companies, I don't like to ask for any proprietary information. And I know that they're focused on a plutonium-based fuel, and so the fuel they're going to use is from their initial one is going to be from experimental breeder reactor 2 out in Idaho, which was enriched, I think 67%. They're going to downblend that to that 20% level, and then they're going to operate in the fast spectrum. They're a fast spectrum reactor. I believe that they would be able to do that. Now, when I spoke with Carolyn Cochran, she's like, we love nuclear waste. We want it. We want to use it. So whether they're able to blend it or not, I don't know. and that's a reactor physics question that,
Okay.
based on their reactor geometry, is going to get totally into that proprietary level information. Now, I could ask her, would you be able to use a blended, a thorium, plutonium blended fuel? And she could just say yes, but I've never asked that question of her. And the way I look at it, I imagine they could make some minor modifications to their design. So there might be, say, an Aurora, and then Aurora Mark 1, Aurora Mark 2. Aurora Mark 1 would be, it runs off of, plutonium, and then the Aurora Mark 2 would, say, operate off of a blended fuel that's just configured slightly differently to maybe maximize their neutron, population, to minimize their losses. Have better reflectors, whatever they're going to use to control that neutron population, because they're not anticipating that 2.91 neutron generated per fission. They're going to be somewhere down, on average, if you're looking at a blended fuel like that, say they're down to like 2.4 or 2.3. How do they control that neutron population so that they have, one, to keep the reactor sustainable, and two, the second one, to produce your, to create your fuel from those, I'll use the term inert fuels, inert materials, to turn it into nuclear fuel. And then three, you got to account for losses. So
right. It's
kind of a nuclear version of friction.
Gotcha. Maybe when we do part 4 with Mark, we might be able to get her to come on with us and kind of talk to us a little bit about that. Maybe Mark's got this way to set something like that up. I guess we'll have to see. We do have Libertarian in Chief is going to pop in here for a minute, and he's got a question. I guess he's been working on for a few days. So, what's up, Todd? We can't hear you, Todd.
Todd, you're on mute.
Todd, you got to unmute yourself. There you go. What's up, man?
How you doing, guys?
Doing great. Todd, this is Mark. Mark, this is Todd.
Nice to meet you, Mark.
Todd.
All right. Go ahead, Todd.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me on. I have been listening to you, and you guys have been going deep into the different types of nuclear and whatnot. My question kind of dials back to what happens if we don't do this. So if you could walk through a little bit about how old are some of the plants out there, what happens when 20% of the energy that we're drawing from nuclear starts to go away, and how hard that's going to be to replace with green if we don't start doing more nuclear.
So, we are actually living that experience now, even though nuclear is producing more energy than it ever has. Back in the 1980s, we had 120 operating reactors, and it produced 40% of our energy for the nation. And then as we expanded, we built coal, we built oil, we built natural gas plants to supplement the energy as nuclear plants, were shut down and weren't replacing them. When nuclear gets shut down, it gets replaced with fossil fuels. It doesn't get replaced with wind turbines. It doesn't get replaced with solar. That is the pipe dream of the Greens, is that they think that when we shut down a nuclear plant, and Germany's proving this. Germany, every time they shut down a nuclear plant, their emissions spike. So Germany's one of the worst polluting countries in Europe, and they're shutting down their nuclear plants, and they only become worse. They also see a rise in their electricity costs. Right, so every time you shut down nuclear, you actually cause a rise in your electricity costs. Germany and France is the great experiment, the great comparison, because you have these two countries that are very similar as far as population, economic development, even just the way that they operate as a people. France and Germany are very, very similar, and Germany is basically down to like 2 or 3 nuclear plants left. And France has 70% of its energy comes from nuclear, 20 to 25% is from hydro, and the remaining 5% is from oil or natural gas. And so they have some of the cleanest energy, and they pay half of the electricity costs of Germany. And the big lie that the oil and gas people like to talk about is that France's electricity costs are astronomical. They tax the living crap out of their energy, and it's still half the cost of Germany.
Their
so that's what's
taxes
crazy.
are astronomical.
Their taxes are astronomical, but their energy cost is like primarily taxes. Like if they didn't tax it, their energy would be ridiculously cheap. So that's one of the things that's great. It's fascinating. And then going with, to continue on, if we push more towards this wind and solar, we're going to have more of like what occurs out in California. California does 2 rounds of blackouts a year, specifically Southern California does 1, which is based around the peak of summer when it is hottest in the state. They have to do blackouts at peak energy consumption because that's at the point when solar is going offline and it's hours before wind kicks up, right? They spent $100 billion on renewables. California spent $100 billion. For that same $100 billion, I could have built enough nuclear reactors to replace 100% of their grid, to include Diablo Canyon. They're one operating nuclear power plant. They could have brand new nuclear operating 100% of their power. But instead, with that $100 billion, they have rolling blackouts because it gets too hot in the summer. And then they have rolling blackouts because the transmission lines are much further to get to those solar farms because no one wants that stuff near them. No one wants those giant wind turbines near them. They're out in the middle of nowhere. So these transmission lines go through these long, extremely dry forests, and you get the wind blowing in the fall, and they're causing arcing and sparking. So they have to shut down these lines, during that time frame. And so basically, California is a third world country if you are not an ultra elite, which blows my mind to me because I have a cousin that he lives in Newport Beach, California. He has never experienced a blackout. No one in Newport Beach has ever experienced a blackout. Every other county around them experiences a blackout, but Newport Beach is where all the ultra wealthy live. The ultra wealthy are going to get their energy. It doesn't matter.
Almost like that's by design.
It is by design. And then the other thing is, and this is something that Andrew Yang really pisses me off, is you hear this thing called a smart grid. Mm-hmm. You've heard that term?
Yes.
That grid is really smart at taking power from people. That's the only thing it's good at. That's what they mean by a smart grid. Because whenever it says, it's going to make sure the power goes where it needs to, I said, do you know what that's called? That's called just putting everything onto a grid. Because if you have everything onto a grid, then everyone has access to the power. Electrons will flow where they're needed.
Right. To your point there, where you said the people in Newport Beach have never lost power. I saw something that Gavin Newsom of California said, where he was like, by I think it's 2024, there will be absolutely no oil or natural gas extraction allowed in the state of California. And reasonably, people are like, well, you don't think your blackouts are bad enough? Right. That's kind of what I thought too. But someone had commented that, I have solar panels and backup and all this, and I've got a 3,000 square foot house and yada, yada, yada. And I have 2 electric cars and I have more power than I need. And so my response was, well, how much did that cost you? And how in the hell do you think poor people can afford that, you idiot? This is a mind virus in these people where they're like, I don't understand. I have $80,000 to put into solar. What do you mean you poors don't have this? What?
Now I will say this. The one thing that I like about that is that they have their own backup. Mm-hmm. Right? I don't mind people who have their own solar, their own wind, so long as they have their own backup. Because then they're not destabilizing my grid. They're not affecting my energy prices. Right? Yeah. But the people who throw on solar panels, like, well, I'm going to sell power back to the power company. That power is not being sold. No, it's just being wasted. And and here's something that's crazy to me. Going back to that whole energy grid thing, are the number of people who don't understand that just because a wind turbine is connected to the grid doesn't mean your grid is suddenly green. Electrons don't care what produces them. Right. Electron is going to flow to your flow through, your toaster oven. It doesn't matter it doesn't care where it comes from. And one of the things that when I got the opportunity to speak to the Speaker of House of Delegates for West Virginia, and I said, you guys should be nuclear. You have the best construction, regulations out there. You get rid of the super little pesky law. You can keep your coal powering your people, and then you can build nuclear and you can sell it to all these states around you saying, oh, look, we're selling you our nuclear power. You're already, those grids are already connected. The grid could be between West Virginia and Pennsylvania and Maryland. It's all connected. It's all interconnected. There's like 3 grids in the US, right? You got the East Coast that goes all the way into the Midwest. You've got the West Coast, which, goes up, like Montana, Arizona, all that. And then you have Texas, right? So we have, we have 3 individual grids which is like Texas, Oklahoma, and all that. Yeah. But and I understand where you're laughing at because of the whole Texas issue. But the fact is that if I put a coal plant in, and I put it on the grid in West Virginia, and I live in Missouri, right?
Yeah, it doesn't do you any good.
I mean, transmission lines not really going to make it there, but really, if you look at the grid as a whole, everything gets connected to the grid, right? It's all connected on there. All these generators are on there together, and basically, the grid as a whole is the whole thing. But all of a sudden, they should be like, oh, look, we put a wind turbine on. Look at how green we are. Your power is coming from a state and it's coal to replace that. Just to throw that out there.
They don't get it. Reed's now spamming the chat because he has to, apparently, and saying that we need to ban cow farts. So that's important that we get it. We'll get right on that, Reed.
Hey, so you saw Biden's climate plan about how we can only eat a burger a month. So from now
I sent him pictures of me smoking 30 pounds of meat with the giant bite me attached.
So from now on, my burgers identify as salads, and it's racist to call them anything other than salads.
I love that plan. We're gonna hashtag salads or burgers or salad from now on.
It's got lettuce on it. It's a salad.
And you can't be a bigot. You just can't be a bigot.
You can't be a bigot. Yeah, you can't
be a bigot. I suppose if you can take my man card away, then now I'm non-binary, and you have to like respect my truth, or you're a bigot.
You're right.
That's how it works. Right. So, nice. Todd, did you have seriously? I don't know why. It's from that movie City of Angels. It was the first. It's the only movie that's ever made me cry, and I was like 13 when I saw it. Okay, so I just like the song.
Now you got me feeling bad because I'm making fun of 13-year-old Arcaic.
That's I know. Well,
he was non-binary back then too.
Yeah, and you're basically a bigot making fun of me. That's how this works. Todd, did you have anything further? Another question, maybe, or?
The only other question I had was, I look at everything from a business perspective, and you touched on it. But if you could look at it or talk about it from a capacity standpoint, what my understanding is that nuclear is much more a higher utilization than the other energy forms. So when you take off nuclear and then you add in energy such as wind or solar, what does that look like? How much more do they have to build in order to replace one of these plants?
This is a great question.
Yeah, well, I always say this when you're talking wind and solar, is that you basically get one power plant for the price of 2, because you got to build your wind farm or solar farm, and then you have to build your fossil backup for it. Or, there's even talks about building advanced nuclear backups to them. They could ramp up and down rapidly.
That makes sense. Let's do that.
No. So here's the great thing. If we go to a nuclear backup, do you know what they're going to do? They're just going to turn off the wind and solar farms and go, why'd we build this?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to tear them down and be like, eh.
Yeah, okay. I mean, we could extend nuclear fuel out. Like, if you ramp up, like, okay, your wind farm, whatever, we'll ramp up, whatever you want, whatever power you want, we'll give it to you.
Yeah.
But you talk about capacity factor, and that's part of the reason why nuclear keeps breaking records as far as energy production. Is that if you look back in the 70s and 80s, nuclear was probably we very similar to coal at 60% power or capacity factor. And then over the years, we realized it's just easier to just keep these reactors online and operate them at full power. It's just, it just works better. And any large machinery doesn't like to change up and down, right? Even if you're driving on the highway, if your car's going at 70 miles an hour, it likes to stay at 70 miles an hour. But when you're shifting gears, that's when you have the weird noises. That's when things break. Same thing with a nuclear power plant, or same thing with any kind of power plant, whether it's wind, coal, solar. Well, solar's a little different because it's a photovoltaic. But if you're talking concentrated solar, no, it's when these equipment ramp up and down, that's when you break things, right? Because you have crazy vibrations that occur and all that. So with ramping these natural gas plants online, because that's typically the replacement whenever you go to a wind and solar. Now you have more maintenance costs, you have more fuel costs, right? And then you have the two power plant production thing. And if I'm a utility, I want my power plants operating at all times, really, right? Because I want the most amount of energy per cost, right? And people is a big cost for all these power stations. Specifically, it's the highest with nuclear. So nuclear, I want those things operating at full power so that I'm getting them max profit, right? When you look at it from a business perspective, I want my power plants operating at peak power. And one of the things that's interesting that the wind and solar folks don't get is that there are utilities that are pushing for battery backup, and they're not pushing it so that it can be backup to wind and solar. They're pushing it so that they can run their power plants at 100% power. And then when it's off peak, they're charging the batteries. And then when they're at peak, they're discharging the batteries. And because those require minimal operator, they
So
require
it's just
minimal
power storage.
It's just power storage.
Just
to
less
basically
employees in order to have maximum production.
maximum
Well, that's
power
smart.
output. Yeah, I mean, and that's and here's the thing is that I hear wind and solar folks saying all the time, I want to do this, I want to do this. And I'm like, the utilities are telling you they're not going to do that. They're
Right.
saying that. They're saying it openly. And the wind and solar folks, they're going to build all these battery banks. And literally the CEOs of these companies are like, we're building these so that we can operate our natural gas plants 100% output. And they'll say it just like that. Flat out, we're going to operate our coal at 100% output because it makes us the most money then. I don't have to pay people to sit in a power station that's doing nothing. I can pay people to sit in a power station that's making me money, right? So that's the key. And that's a great question as far as the financial goes, is that, that's what you want as a company is you want to operate that piece of equipment, right? And it just blows my mind. I want to operate. You want to operate these things till you break it, and then you fix it, and then you operate it some more until you break it, and then then you want to keep your stuff running. And when things break, you fix it. That's the way we want to operate.
Well, that's just, America in general, for the most part, over the last, since the industrial age, that's how we do things. You just run it into the ground, repair it, run it back into the ground. Eventually, you run it into the ground so much you have to replace it. But, that's
true statement.
You get through it as much as you can. So, yeah, I like that. But also, one of the things I would add, Todd, is that the first show that Mark and I did, and he's going to be able to tell this better than I can, is the power output, what it requires for solar, the land mass required as compared to, I believe we were discussing the power plant in California.
Yeah, so I love using this because the numbers work out perfectly. Yeah. Right. So Australia built a giant 2 gigawatt wind farm, right, which is about the size of 2 nuclear reactors. In fact, it's the exact same size as Diablo Canyon. So that solar farm in Australia takes 13,000 acres and has a capacity factor of 20%. Diablo Canyon has a capacity factor in excess of 90%, generates 2 gigawatts of energy on 13 acres. So I need 5 solar farms to make up for Diablo Canyon, plus sufficient battery backup that can store it for the 80% of the time it's not operating. And that's another thing that a lot of people don't get, is that I can stack wind farms, and solar farms, right? But the wind is what control. We're not controlling when the energy is being produced. We're allowing the weather and the cycle of the planet to determine when we're getting our energy. Right? This is going back to the Stone Age times, right? We might as well be burning freaking mammoth dung, right? I mean, that's what happens when you go to wind and solar. Is that we're going back to the Stone Age, effectively, when it comes to our energy production. When the Industrial Revolution, going back to that, right? In the Industrial Revolution, we said, hey, we can harness the resources of the planet to better society. You can agree whether it bettered society or not. But I mean, when you look at the explosion as far as the, what happened with, medicine and all these things were all harnessed on industry. And when you look at the energy density is where you look at it, right? Energy density, dung and wood, really low energy density. You get to coal, more energy density. Oil and natural gas, even more. And then you go to nuclear. And nuclear is so futuristic when you look at the energy density. It's insane. Like, I mean, the amount of energy that you get from like one nuclear fuel pellet is like 3 train cars of coal. Like, we can't comprehend the amount of energy that's in the gummy bear of gummy bear sized of nuclear fuel. Like, you see this nuclear reactor and it's this giant piece of equipment, but the fuel that goes to operate it is really, really small. I mean, a submarine, about 100 megawatts of power output or thermal power output, which means if you took that reactor, put it onto a turbine, about 30 to 40 megawatts of energy production. Its physical nuclear reactor, which lasts for 33 years, is the size of a 55-gallon trash can. That's all your nuclear waste, right?
That's insane.
That's all of your nuclear waste in a 55-gallon trash can that operates for 33 years. That's it. That's it.
I see. That's one of the issues that I have when people go, well, what about the waste? I'm like, do you realize that all nuclear waste, all of it, stacked at 6.5 feet high, fits on a football field? All of it.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, what are we going to do with it? It's going to last for like 1 billion years. And I'm like, no, it's not. Read. Like, use that supercomputer for something more than tweeting nonsense and looking at porn. What is wrong with you people?
Did you know that there was a natural reactor?
No, but you're going to tell me about it now.
Oh, I'm going to tell you about it. So I talk about the Aurora, the company Oklo.
Right.
The natural reactor is actually named Oklo.
Oh, the sun. Duh.
No, not the sun. No, there was a natural uranium reactor that ran for a couple million years in Africa. And so basically it would boil, it would heat the water, and it would develop this 100,000-year cycle where it's basically consuming the uranium-235, generating plutonium-239, but it was water. So the water brings the neutrons down to the energy that uranium doesn't like. So 100,000 years, heat up the water, and then it's shut down. Plutonium-239 decays into uranium-235, by the way. And so 100,000 years it operate, and then it shut down for 100,000 years. And then there'd be enough uranium-235 that would decay from the plutonium to then start up the reaction again. It'd run for 100,000 years, shut down for 100,000 years. So when you go to that area, and it's in Gabon, and Google it, you're gonna blow your mind.
I'm gonna Google it when this show's done.
Yeah.
That's happening.
And they figured out that this reactor was operating naturally for millions of years because they went and looked at the uranium ore, and instead of being that 99.3% uranium-238 and 0.7%, it was significantly less uranium-235 because it'd been consumed.
Wow. That's awesome.
So nuclear energy is natural.
Hey, there you go. That should help the plebes that are all like, no, it's not. Yeah,
it's natural.
It's natural. It just the Earth made it.
In Africa. Yeah, the Earth made it.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of that. One of the things that I don't have a big problem with, and that I'm having more trouble fighting and saying, well, it's less green than nuclear, is geothermal. Now, I know that there's some dangers to it and stuff, but the argument is I'll have a lot of people, okay, and they'll come at me. Apparently, Todd's now going to be the co-host because Magnus is having all kinds of nightmare trouble. But a lot of people will come at me and they'll say, well, geothermal is even safer than nuclear. Here's the problem. That doesn't work everywhere. Like, you can't just, I'm not kidding. They literally believe I can just go in my backyard and drill a hole. Yeah. And I'm going to have geothermal energy. And I'm like, you do not understand how this works. I don't live on top of a volcano.
So I have said this, and this is my one of my credibility statements, is I've said if we can get geothermal and tidal to be able to produce the energy that we need.
Which by next week they're gonna actually bring one of the largest tidal wave reactors on Earth online. So that'll be interesting to see.
If they can make it functional, you could convince me to walk away from nuclear. I say that because I don't think it's going to happen.
Me neither.
Because you have the same energy dilution problem, and the thing is that tidal and geothermal are so small, and when you look at the amount of energy produced from those, it's extremely small. In the grand scheme of things, right? You bring on these giant tidal, monstrosities, and I'm not saying they won't work, but where's tidal? It's in the ocean. The ocean causes a lot of maintenance. And it's not like you're getting a huge amount of power from this thing going up and down like that, right? Or the propeller that spins back and forth. And water's a great, that's why hydroelectric is so useful, is because, causing that water cascading, works. One of the things that I find interesting is that growing up in, the Portland area of Oregon, they're installing these little turbines in all the piping systems for their water main, that as the water's flowing throughout the city, they're going to cause a slight reduction of pressure for some power backup, which works great in the Pacific Northwest, where all your water treatment plants are really high. Doesn't work well when you're in an area that's flat, like where I live in Virginia, because now I'm just having to use more pumps to pump it up there. It's not like I haven't, because we have pumps that produce that power. And if I'm just basically wasting energy, right, I'm not really gaining anything. I'm just losing my energy in I²R losses, which is just the energy that occurs from heat from your power lines, right? So if all I'm doing is turning motors, I'm just giving away energy. Sometimes just, and a lot of people don't understand these nuances of how, energy works. That is very, frustrating. Again, other than nuclear, where I'm destroying matter to create energy, your energy, you have to do something with that energy. I don't magically get energy other than nuclear.
I agree with that, and apparently nuclear is magic because the Earth decided that it was. So, I didn't know about that. I can't wait to look that up and be like, because I'm gonna have a lot of fun when I have the other engineer on to be like, yeah, well, Earth doesn't make your stupid power all by itself, but it does make nuclear. So there's that. Keep that in mind. Another question. I'm with you on that. I like the idea of geothermal, and I like the idea of the using the ocean currents and stuff. I also agree with you. I just don't see how we pull that off. Like, I just don't see it as, maybe if we get better technology, it might eventually one day be awesome. But right now,
when we talk geothermal and tidal, I see a lot of it as what are known as the water batteries, where they bathe the pump storage.
Yes,
and
yes.
That is cited often by the renewable groups. The word uses, and they cite this one, I think it's in Michigan, that isn't operating. Like, we got this water battery we can use. And I'm like,
Yeah.
But
It doesn't
they
do anything.
shut it down because it doesn't make enough money.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, exactly. And we do live in a look, capitalism will always win. That's the bottom line. Bridget Fedesi, who's a hilarious comedian, has a show called Dumpster Fire. Everyone should check it out. She has an entire segment every week where it's capitalism always wins. And it's just some nonsense crazy thing that capitalism won. Well, it's always going to win in energy. I want the lowest cost energy. That's what I want. And as Americans, that's what we're accustomed to. Why is the price high? Make it lower. I don't know how anyone lives in California anymore. I literally don't understand it. I just don't get it. My gas bill goes up obviously in the winter. My electric or my water bill goes up in the summer, but that's because I have a lawn. I understand this. I know this is going to happen. But if my gas bill was $200 in the summer, I would move.
Yeah.
I'd be like, this is ridiculous. Now
I would shut off my gas and just take the startup and shutdown fee.
People ask me all the time, why don't you switch to all electric? And I'm like, because electricity is more expensive than natural gas. It just is. Where I live, it is. You know what I mean?
I have natural gas heat and natural gas hot water heater, and it is cheaper, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a reason why it's cheaper.
Yeah.
It's because you're using that energy efficiently.
Right.
It comes down to energy efficiency, right? The natural gas that goes to operate a turbine that's going to make electricity, there's losses that occur from that, right? It's not, it's only producing 80%. I think it's about 80% for combustion turbine, right? And that's assuming it's a combustion turbine. So you already have so you have to pay for that 20%, right? The customer pays for that. The consumer's going to pay for that 20%. So now the natural gas that pumps into your home is 20% less than the natural gas that you're going to get as electricity.
Right.
And that doesn't, now we could say transmission costs are probably about the same because you got to move your, whether it's through pipes or whether it's through cables, right? That energy's got to get to you. And then
it doesn't matter. Natural gas, cable, propane, you have transportation loss no matter what.
Yeah. And then, right, so I use an electric heater, which is not as efficient as gas at heating, right? So now I have to pay for that inefficiency in the form of a higher electric bill.
Right.
So I have to pay for the inefficiency in producing electricity, and I have to pay for the inefficiency in using the electricity. So I have a double hit. So if I bring it locally,
it's almost like inflation.
It is. Oh, absolutely is.
I just, because Todd's here with me, I'm like, he understands where I'm coming from a libertarian standpoint of like the government robs us one way or another. They'll always make sure to get their beak wet. One of the things that got brought up, Kitty, Matt, Sasha, she's watched all of our shows, by the way, and I appreciate her doing so. She said, you also never discussed seawater harvesting. So, I know that one. She mentioned it last time, and this time I was like, we will, I promise. So
here's the great thing is that seawater harvesting, we're going to have to bring your grandma in.
Okay.
I kid you not. This is how they harvest uranium from seawater. Acrylic yarn.
Are you serious?
I am serious.
My mother-in-law is going to love hearing that.
So you basically take these strands of yarn and you just stick it in the ocean. So as the tectonic plates shift, and all that all the volcanic action occurs, right? That all this stuff gets kicked up into the seawater, right? And just flows throughout the ocean. Nuclear is a renewable energy. We're gonna, someday, and when the Earth cools down, the sun expands and destroys us, we might run out of fuel that's inside the planet, right? But you can literally collect uranium that's in the ocean water using acrylic yarn. And so now,
Well,
going back to
there you
that
go.
mining thing, right? For some reason, acrylic attracts the uranium. I'm not sure what they do with it, but I remember reading an article when I first got into advocacy. I'm like, we can literally extract this stuff just with like a bunch
so
of
we could
yarn and
drag
seawater.
yarn with a boat.
You didn't drag
get
it.
our uranium. Oh, we just like go out there and just
put it in the
drop it
harbor. You just put it like off the coast,
and
it
just pull
the
it up.
currents just flows it through. It's it's dissolved into the into
Yeah,
the
I think there
saltwater.
might be something to that. Like something that like there might be something to that. Like, that we're like, hey, we're not even mining this stuff. We just drop shit in water and then it just collects.
Yeah.
We pull it up when necessary. That's a weird type of bait. That's a weird type of bait, I gotta say. Like,
but yarn, like,
what are you fishing for today? Uranium. How's the fishing? The tide's not really good today, but tomorrow.
it's slow going. I gotta keep this yarn here for like 30 days before getting an accumulation.
I'll get a bite in like 30 days. Maybe 6 months from now, I'll have something to work with.
We'll get enough to build a micro reactor this week.
That's awesome. I don't care. Like, it's a thought. It's a way that you could be collecting it. It doesn't matter.
I mean, it's a fascinating fact that we do not know where all the uranium is, right? Much like when you talk about oil and gas, right? I mean, I remember growing up being told we're going to run out of oil. Then we just keep finding more of this stuff.
They've been saying that since I was born.
They've been saying that.
Yeah. It's gone. We're going to be dead. I mean, also Al Gore said that like we were all supposed to be underwater by now, but he still owns 3 beach houses. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
just saying.
I mean,
So it's almost like they might lie for money. It's weird.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I live. I have a tidal creek behind my house, and I look at it every day. And I've lived here for 10 years, and I don't think that the level has been significant. The change in levels have been significant. I do know from my own experience in the nuclear industry that if you heat up water, it expands.
Yes.
I mean, that's literally a thing. So we actually have
that's normal. That's a thing.
That's normal. So I don't want to overheat my oceans. That is a problem. So I mean, I use the climate change argument that climate change is a problem, whether it's real, imaginary, somewhere in between, right? And we need a solution for it. We need a solution that is not going to reduce the emissions that cause global warming, according to global warming experts, or we need something that's going to cause a solution that is not going to destroy us financially.
Yeah, and we don't need 15 days to slow the spread that was 390 days ago. We don't need that. That's a terrible idea. So let's not do that. Yeah. One of the things that I like, and I've started to do this, people say, climate change is gonna change everything, right? If we don't start making drastic changes now, everything's gonna change. You may not feel it for a few years, but you will feel it. And I'm like, all right, so I battled the argument over the science of rather humans caused it for a couple of years. And now I've realized that that's not the way to make the argument. It's to agree with them.
Yeah.
And then tell them, well, we need to build a bunch of nuclear power plants. Obviously.
Yeah.
That's what fixes it. And that's how we're going to fix this thing. Yeah, exactly. But then when they do, it goes, why? Explain why. And it's always the same argument every time. Well, it's dangerous. And it's like, no, it's not. I can prove it. Which is why I'm doing these conversations with you, is to prove, no, it's extremely safe.
Yeah. It's crazy safe.
It's crazy safe. It's probably the safe. Well, it is the safest, honestly. Or energy system that we have. It's absolutely the safest as far as cost of human life.
Do you know how many lives the nuclear industry saves every year? You have smoke detectors. You have smoke detectors in your house, right?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, well, it didn't save that one guy's life, just saying.
Yeah.
The one that thought he could build a reactor in his shed. He died.
Of suicide like 3 years ago.
No. There was a guy that he got radiation poisoning, but he was like getting old clocks and smoke detectors, and he was taking the stuff out, and he thought he was going to build himself a little something, but he got radiation. He may have killed himself. I probably would if I had radiation poisoning. I'm just saying.
So there was a story back in the 90s of a kid that was trying to earn his atomic energy badge for the Boy Scouts.
Mm-hmm.
to get his Eagle Scout, and he literally built a nuclear reactor in his backyard. He got
I remember
yellow cake from a university.
Yeah. I remember reading that and people going, "How did he do this?" And I'm like, "He's obviously should be president."
He was collecting radium, and he bought a clock. And I remember like the big find is he was buying radium clocks for the dial, scrape the radium off him, and he bought a clock. And there was a vial of the paint in there, and he goes, "Yes, I hit pay dirt." Like he was so excited about it. Like he built this functional nuclear reactor in his backyard. He was like burning his clothes in his backyard because he's getting contamination. I mean, it was crazy. But
come on, you know that kid was going places.
Oh yeah, one, and then his mom died like 4 or 5 years ago. That he couldn't handle it after that. She was
I knew which story you were talking about when you said he committed suicide, but that's not the guy I was talking about. But that kid was like awesome, in my opinion. I was like, see, how far would we be in technology if that kid wouldn't have gotten in trouble? If they would have been like, well, now you need to go to MIT and like learn all kinds of engineering.
Can you teach our engineers how to build this stuff?
Yeah. Can you teach our engineers how to build a nuclear reactor? Because that'd be cool.
Yeah, because you built one in your backyard. Like, I mean,
out of clocks.
There's a kid who built a nuclear fusion reactor in his backyard, and because it's fusion, not fission, it's a completely different animal. I mean, you could still give yourself radiation poisoning from a fission reactor.
Yeah, but it's much harder.
It's much harder, yes, because you don't have you don't produce the same kind of a contamination. It's much shorter lived.
Right.
And you have much smaller reactions overall. But I mean, that's fascinating. But there's more energy produced in a fusion than when you fuse atoms and when you split them, as far as you're talking down at the low levels. When you get to iron, it basically is energy neutral. You put a bunch of energy in, you get nothing out.
We are gonna switch gears here because one of the things that I've been catching a bunch of hell on Twitter for is that we don't, according to them, talk enough about the other energy services. Now we kind of started that way today a little bit. I recently just Googled to try to find out how many people die mining cobalt, and the numbers are terrifying and inaccurate according to everything I could find, because a lot of these mines are in places where they just don't tell you. They're just not honest, Apparently the government of Congo is like, well, slaves don't really count, so we don't care. So the death rate for mining for cobalt is really bad. Last year, let me get this. Last year alone, the estimate is between 14,000 and 60,000 globally mining for cobalt. Just cobalt. That's it.
Yeah.
So right there, I mean, like, what's the argument they always make here? Like, if it saves one life, well, how about we save 60,000 lives? I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Like, let's stop mining for this nonsense.
Well, and the crazy thing is going to that capitalist argument is that, they're demanding this, right? We have created a demand for these materials because we're being sold this lie that wind and solar can make up for all this stuff.
It cannot. I checked all the power. It's not possible. It's not possible. It's just not.
I think I did the math one time, and I think to make up the the energy demand for the United States that they're talking about of nuclear, just of nuclear, would require basically taking the state of Pennsylvania and turning it into a massive solar farm.
I'm sure Pennsylvania will love you if you do that.
I mean, that's just to replace nuclear.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. This is one of the things. A paper I read, it came out of Cornell University, and they were talking about this. And I'm going to give the researchers a lot of credit because they were calling out the negatives of solar, right? The positives and negatives. But the negative was that they said that in order to generate enough power for California not to have rolling blackouts, they would basically have to have solar panels across the entire desert, all of it, just all of it. You know what I mean? And they said, not only is that going to actually generate a lot of heat, so you're essentially causing global warming by having that many panels out there.
Yeah,
but
because
also
you're absorbing that energy, not reflecting it back.
Yeah, but you can only collect about 20% of it. The rest of it's just going to get reflected like a mirror. So they were making that argument that you're going to warm up the area around you. And then the other argument they made is you can't just take out that entire desert because you're going to have a whole bunch of other groups going, what about the turtles? What about this weird gecko lizard thing or whatever? You just can't. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense from an economic or environmental standpoint. Rather that environment be carbon emission, or rather that be, do we want to save the weird one-eyed spotted dragon gecko? I don't know if that's real, but I'm just saying. Because that's the way these people operate.
And how many millions of Uyghurs have to die to make your solar panels?
Exactly. I mean, how many Uyghur Muslims do we sacrifice, and how many little African children in the Congo do we sacrifice for you to have your solar panels so that you can go, I'm green and I can charge my Tesla?
Yeah, because 60% of solar panels are like produced in China by slave labor.
Yes.
So
exactly.
you're all for slavery reparations, but you're going to exploit the slave labor.
They're only talking about slaves here. They don't care about slaves. They don't care about the fact that that Yemen has the largest slave market in the history of the world right now. They don't care about that. That's not a thing to them. They're like, what? No, that's not real. Yes, it is. Yes, they have auctions online. Online for people. This happens right now in today's world. So don't talk to me about reparations. You know, if you care about slaves, let's go, I don't know, free some. Just saying. Yeah. No, I don't actually advocate us going to war, but if we are going to go to war as a nation, that's a pretty good reason.
That's a pretty good cause, yeah.
Yeah, that's one I'd be like, well, okay. I mean, if they're like, well, you know, Syria has weapons of mass destruction, I'll be like, shut up, we're not doing that one again. But like, Yemen has slaves and they're auctioning them off online, I'll be like, okay, that's true, I can look that up.
One of the things, and I don't understand, is that why are we afraid of countries getting nuclear weapons? Do you really think North Korea is going to commit suicide by nuclear weapon?
Because and North Korea has nuclear weapons, I promise you.
Yeah. Oh, no,
they have.
They've tested them. Oh yeah.
They're they have them. There's no all this nonsense. They're like, we can't let Iran get a nuclear weapon. I'm like, I bet they actually already have a couple. And why do I care? Like,
Iran,
of course they have them. They're not going to use them. Yeah. They're not going to use them. They know the backlash if they tried to use one. They know the backlash.
Yeah, and it's not like you're going to be able to transport this freaking, a nuclear weapon takes a large amount of nuclear material. That it's not like a one-person job.
No, you know what I mean? No, it's gonna take a minute to get it going. Like that's kind of how it works.
Because a nuclear weapon requires not just 150 pounds of freaking nuclear material. It requires, several tons of explosives to get the nuclear material in the right configuration to cause that explosion, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's not like you're walking. These things won't fit on trucks.
No, they won't. That's the thing. I don't understand where everyone's all nutty. So I do have a couple more questions, but I am going to let Todd kind of jump in here if he's paying attention. I know he's got his mic muted. And I have a question, and then he can follow up if he has a follow up. But I have to, use little boy's room. But my question is, so with the okay, here's the question. So all of our submarines and all of our aircraft carriers in the U.S. Navy are now they're all nuclear powered, correct? We discussed that, I believe, in episode 1.
Yep.
So okay, they're all nuclear powered. One of the biggest things that I see from the Greenpeace people and everything is that they the U.S. military is the largest polluter out of the United States of America as far as carbon emissions go. I cannot actually find any good data that says that to be true. I have found a lot of data that suggests it's probable. My question is, the Navy kind of has led the way in the nuclear battle as far as the submarines and the aircraft carriers and stuff. Where are we in the future, and what's the possibility in the future of the entire U.S. Navy going nuclear? So I'm going to let you discuss that for a minute, and I'll be right back.
All right. Yeah. So as far as the Navy going 100% nuclear, in 2007, when oil prices were spiking, there was a law passed or an executive order written that basically said any ship class in the United States Navy, destroyer size or larger, had to be evaluated to be nuclear powered. So it's on the table to make every new class of ship in the Navy nuclear powered. Now, at the time, the Zumwalt class destroyer was already in design, non-nuclear powered, but the cruiser replacement, there's designs for it to be nuclear powered. The next generation destroyer, which we're using the Arleigh Burke class, there's talks about it being nuclear powered. The America class amphibious assault ship, it was already designed and approved before, and we're starting construction at that time frame. But the next generation of any of these new ship classes, that's on the table for them. The problem that the United States Navy has is the over-regulation by naval reactors. That's the biggest problem they have, is that naval reactors has their hands in everything, right? I can't even change the color of the freaking chair that we sit on, and they're the most uncomfortable chairs because it's some nuclear grade chair that went out of, they stopped building them, 30 years ago. And you look at the new designs like, man, that thing looks comfortable. Nope, I got the thing that's going to give me back pain that I have to sit in, right? And so we have this old school mentality, and we really need to shake the box with naval reactors. Now, the big box shaking that is occurring is the Army's mobile reactor program. Because if the Army gets, or the Department of Defense mobile reactor program, because the Army's in charge of that, the Army can come online and develop a new method of operating nuclear, then we can get there. The Navy can't even think outside of the standard pressurized water reactor. So the Navy is struggling to even think beyond, the current technology. The first nuclear powered submarine was the USS Nautilus. Went out to sea in 1955. Famous statement, underway on nuclear power, right? Like huge, big event in the Navy, right? And basically, other than some minor upgrades, and I say minor meaning that we just improved manufacturing techniques, reliability of the equipment, added in some digital equipment to make it work better, the Navy's basically operating the same thing. Now we've gotten more efficient with our reactor designs. We used to refuel, the first reactors, you had to be refueled every 6 months. Now we go 33 years and they're never refueled, right? Throwaway submarines. So we've gotten better with the technology from that aspect.
They're the Hyundais of submarines. No offense, Hyundai. Y'all have great cars. Sorry.
But so that's a big problem that the Navy has. But when you can get towards a nuclear, Army, when the Army can go nuclear and can have, these generators on their fobs that, are a mobile nuclear reactor that can fit on the bed of a semi-truck, right? Can fit inside of a C-17, Globemaster 3 and be flown in, right? Now I can have my forward operating base with, say 3 or 4 of these things, making a crap ton of power. Now I could transition to, say we have some kind of, our Humvee, it has a generator that uses, diesel or JP5 or JP8 or whatever, and then it uses electric drive with batteries. Because I don't know if you've ever seen like some of these battery powered vehicles, because the batteries are all like in the sides and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of extra space in them. Well, I could put a small generator there instead with your fuel tank, and then now you have a backup. And let's say you're primarily running on batteries. Your batteries run out, I can kick over to your diesel to get me to the fob to recharge my batteries, refuel. And so I'm using a backup to that. And we could ultimately decarbonize all that. Now, when you get into the Air Force, I don't think electric planes are going to be a thing, unfortunately. We're going to use jet fuel. That's going to continue to be used. But if you're talking from a standpoint of CO2 extraction from the air, I extract the CO2 to produce fuel, right? Because I can use the waste heat from nuclear to generate, to take the carbon, take carbon dioxide and water, form a hydrocarbon. That hydrocarbon is, effectively fuel. I can create, the fuel you need, and then I can burn that again. Now I have a 0 carbon emission cycle, and I'm burning jet fuel that I'm manufacturing. That's expensive, but I could develop a 0 carbon emission, or just even getting down to the fact that it's basically the Air Force that is producing, Air Force and the Navy and the I say Air Force, and I mean that from a standpoint of, if it flies, it's going to need jet fuel. Because I don't think we're ever getting to electric. It's just not viable.
You're not the only one. Elon Musk agrees with you on that. He doesn't see an electric airplane. He said there's just not enough capacity of energy. And one of the things that he did say, this was on Joe Rogan's podcast, was the only way we might be able to pull it off is if there was a nuclear reactor on the plane, like a small nuclear reactor. He said if we could figure that out, then maybe we have a technically electric jet, international jet, but it's not really electric as much as it's nuclear powered.
Bring back the aircraft reactor experiment.
That was something that he discussed, and he said, look, they didn't put enough time and money and effort into it because it's a viable option to actually fly these giant jets. I mean, we're not talking about small jets anymore. We're talking about monster jets that we can fly around. And he was like, nuclear is the only energy source we have that it'll give it all the power that it needs at any given moment to take off, to land, to everything.
I mean, imagine a nuclear powered aircraft.
I would fly on it. I wouldn't even be afraid.
Well, think of it from like a reconnaissance standpoint, right? Your limiting factor is food.
Yeah. Yeah. Literally. I mean, if a submarine doesn't need refueled for 33 years, essentially this plane only lands because they want it to. Yeah. That's it. That's the only reason this plane lands, is because it has to, because you ran out of food and water. Otherwise, this thing is good, and it can fly around essentially forever. Well, not forever, but obviously for a long, long time.
Yeah. Well, and you when you talk about, I think our first podcast, we talked about the kilopower reactor that is the size of a mini fridge, producing the power for 4 homes. Right?
Yeah, and it also runs the Mars rover.
Mars rover's different. Mars rover runs.
Well, okay, but it's
same concept.
Yeah, we were discussing that it's got this thing's the size of a small refrigerator, and it can run 4 houses for 50 years, 20 years, I think you said. 20 years. Yeah.
20 years.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any reason to believe we couldn't build a small nuclear system that would fly a Boeing 737. I don't see why that's not possible. No one's really going to be in danger because a nuclear operator that knows what they're doing is the only one's going to be allowed to mess with it or whatever. You know what I mean? And
you're going to use fail-safe systems, that use the physics of atoms and energy, so that you don't rely on the operator, right? That's the big difference. And I think a lot of people forget that when we started this stuff, we didn't understand all that. We didn't, we were figuring it out, right? The Wright brothers crashed like 15 aircraft before they finally got, their first one to take off at Kitty Hawk.
Yeah,
right?
both of them broke several bones. One of them broke their back trying to do this thing. But they got it figured out. They just kept doing it.
Right. I mean, think about how many rockets, like you said, Elon Musk blew up. How many rockets did we blow up on the launch pad? How many did we blow up today?
Yeah.
That's a common occurrence. But you're sitting there going, well, we can't, you can't have any problems in testing your nuclear power plant. Okay.
That's insane to me. Of course it can blow up. Why can't it? It's
you know what? We'll meet that requirement. Whoa. What do you mean you're going to meet that requirement? In the past you had problems. I know. That's why we fixed it.
Yeah.
We fixed the problems to make you satisfied. And now you're telling me because in the past we had problems that our solutions to fix that are not good enough.
Would that be an FAA issue to do that? Or is that like no billionaire like Elon Musk is like, I bet I can build a nuclear airplane? Because one of the things that I do remember him saying is that if you could put a nuclear reactor on an airplane, that it would absolutely generate enough electricity to get that beast into the sky and then fly as long as you wanted to, no matter what, and land without issue. Well, and he was like, it absolutely would work 100%.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of it is,
and way less than the batteries.
Yeah, well, and when you're looking, at these giant, because you have the turboprop, right? All you're doing is generating a crap ton of heat. Well, you can do that with a nuclear reactor, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you got to turn your blade on, so you need electricity for that. So let's say you've got, these, you design a reactor that you let's say you use a multiple reactor system, right? I'm going to use a reactor that's designed around creating the heat for the thrust. And I'm going to have a reactor that produces the electrical power necessary to drive the airflow into it so that I can then, generate that appropriate amount of thrust, right? And so I'm not even or maybe even as you heat it up, I'm not an aerospace engineer, so I couldn't tell you how, but maybe just having that one, because I think the aircraft reactor experiment just basically said, I'm just going to, get the reactor started, it generates heat, which causes the turbine to start turning, and then that,
and then
causes more airflow. And I mean, and then you have, each set of engines would have its own reactor. So let's say you have, a 4-engine jet, it's going to have 4 nuclear reactors at the engines.
Well, I remember one of the first things we discussed on our first show was that that you had said they ran a test simulation, I think just on paper or something, about a train engine that they thought would be nuclear reacted. And then I didn't know they tried to run any kind of a simulation on airplanes or whatever. But both are actually quite reasonably. It's something that's reasonable, correct? Both of those are something that the science supports. We could actually do this thing.
Yeah. So the Air Force actually had a program when they were in the infancy called the Aircraft Reactor Experiment. Right. And it was a predecessor for the molten salt reactor experiment. So literally all the testing the Air Force had done became the molten salt reactor that we operated in the 1960s. Right. Okay. All that stuff, that was the foundation for it. When they started in the 50s, right? This is, we're building nuclear reactors. They're barely powering 4 100-watt light bulbs. Right. That's how early into nuclear we are. Like, you need to build a nuclear reactor that can fly an airplane. And so literally the engineers are like, well, this is never going to happen, but let's see what we can do. And so they literally, they actually flew the reactor, but it had never been operated. So they did a test flight
Okay.
of the aircraft over the air to see that they could make the plane fly, just not on nuclear power. And then the test reactor they actually operated and got to work. So the two tests were, we could make a plane that could hold the reactor, that could fly, and we know that we could produce the viable thrust. They just never put the two together to prove that they could work together.
I got you.
But if I can build an engine that produces the correct thrust, I know I can make it work, kind of thing.
Right.
So now the problem that I see with aircraft is always the crash aspect. That's the concern.
I think that's where you would run into it with the general public is, but if this thing crashes, it's a nuclear reactor that's just out there.
And
go ahead. Sorry.
And as much as I would build a nuclear reactor next to my home, I don't want a nuclear reactor that's operating that probably has some level of reduced shielding because it's designed to fly. I probably wouldn't want that to like crash into my home. Because
I don't think I want a nuclear reactor crashing into my home, but I also think that airplanes are actually incredibly safe for the most part. I know they've had if you want to talk about, statistics, how many people have you heard in your life say, well, it's much safer to fly on an airplane than it is to drive in a car?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
well, it's much safer to have a nuclear reactor than it is to have a coal-fired reactor. There you go. Yep. It's the same game. So I kind of feel like if they put the work in, they put the money in and the research, I would be perfectly comfortable flying on an airplane that had a nuclear reactor. But I agree with you. I don't want that thing landing on my house.
Yeah. And that's the.
But I also don't want an airplane landing on my house. It doesn't matter what fuel it.
Well, and now I don't know the engineering behind what kind of, I know the black box technology, right? We don't want the plane crash. You can, this black box
they work. Put your nuclear reactor in the black box.
So I don't know how much that weighs. If they can show that works.
It's heavy. They're heavy. They're about 400 pounds, and they're like 2 foot by 3 foot.
Yeah.
So they're very heavy.
But that kilopower, the actual nuclear reactor is the size of a paper towel roll.
Yeah, it's not big, and so that doesn't weigh much.
So the actual power generation of it may not be all that large.
Let me put it like this: jet fuel, weighs, I believe, 9.1 pounds a gallon.
Okay.
And you require, if my math is correct here, and I could be wrong, 7,100 gallons of jet fuel to fly from Los Angeles, California to London, England. 7,100 gallons at 9 pounds a gallon. Would the reactor weigh less than that?
Yeah.
Okay, they could put more people on the airplane. I'm just saying. So there's that. So even if you have to wrap this thing in carbon fiber to keep it from blowing up if it hits the ground or whatever.
I didn't even think about it from that perspective. I mean, and they're going to be mounted in the wings.
And the fuel is so heavy that it doesn't matter. Fuel's very heavy. Water's 8.14 pounds per gallon. So fuel weighs more. I'm just saying.
Okay. I
know oil and gas. Like that's what I know. Gotcha. Nuclear. I know oil and gas. I'm just saying that the fuel in an aircraft, especially smaller aircrafts, they have they actually have a number. There's a weight distribution number. So they can take as much weight as fuel as they can hold. That's essentially what it comes down to, right? So every pound they put on the aircraft after fuel costs them flight time because they have to make sure they have enough fuel to get to where they're going. That's just how they do things. But if you had a nuclear aircraft, you don't have that problem.
No.
Like, as long as you have the lift required the aircraft can provide, you can hold up as much weight as you need to. You know what I mean? Because you don't have a fuel issue of, do I take on more fuel? Do I shed fuel? What am I doing here? They don't have that problem.
Well, here's the interesting thing. We're talking a nuclear powered aircraft, right? Mm-hmm. Is it, let's say you put the, because when I look at the aircraft reactor experiment, it was the engine. The nuclear reactor was the engine.
Right.
Right. So now if I build a nuclear reactor that's on the engine or that's on the wing, and I need to do maintenance on it, I can pop that engine off and put a replacement on there. Because we do that all the time.
Exactly. Right? So that aircraft is still flyable immediately while that engine gets repaired or whatever. You just
refueled or pop on an old one, put on a new one. Right. And the thing is that one of the things that's interesting is the aviation community actually probably has better maintenance standards and control compared to the nuclear industry. And that just comes from where, they came from, right? The nuclear industry basically is we're going to fix all the problems the coal industry had and get better and better and better. And we're going to rely on, we're going to grab from this group and that group and
made some big adjustments that I like over the coal industry. I'll say that.
Yeah,
for sure.
So and that occurred with the split in 79. So, 79 was really the 3 Mile Island accident changed the nuclear industry planet-wide. Russians took 7 years to get on board and had to have, an accident that was, the worst in, history. But I mean, as an industry, there have been huge improvements. But if we took the aviation industry standards of maintenance, right, and maintenance records, oh my God. I mean, I didn't even think about it from that perspective. And I know that isn't on jet airliners, the fuel is in the wings, right?
Yes. That is why the jokes from comedians make so much, like, why they're so funny. When, you've been on, I'm sure, many airlines or many aircraft, whatever, and especially the commercial civilian ones will say, well, put the mask on, put your head down. It's like, and kiss your ass goodbye, because when this thing hits the ground, it's going to explode. Yeah. Like, there's no question to this. Like, you know what I mean? We know, and it's because the fuel is in the wings. So that's why they light on fire.
Well, and
when they do, you're done. It's game, set, match.
Well, that was part of the justification that the 9/11 attacks, why they chose the aircraft with the cross-country flights was because they had sufficient fuel in the wings, and they chose
they would have a maximum amount of fuel of jet fuel in the wings. Yes,
and they chose the airports off of the distance to New York City and DC.
So they would have maximum amount of fuel in the wing. Well, you wouldn't have that. That would not even be usable with the nuclear aircraft.
I mean, it would be crazy.
They'd be like, okay, you crashed it into the building, and it would crash into the building, and a lot of bad things would happen. You know what wouldn't happen? Explosions, fires, all that.
And then you'd have 4 reactors that get shut down.
Yeah.
Because they've got the super whammadine.
Yeah,
we'd shut it down.
Yep. And I think even from a governmental standpoint, you would think they would like that. They could probably shut those things down via shortwave radio if they needed to and make that plane crash. Like, I'm not suggesting that's a good idea. I'm saying that it's a different system altogether. You don't have jet fuel. You don't have any of that. You're not lighting, sometimes these planes just go down and there's other outside factors where they can light shit on fire and cause a forest fire. This happened in 1981, where the actual jet going down was pretty bad. Don't get me wrong, killed 113 people. Then it killed another 300 people from the forest fire that got caused by the jet fuel that just lit everything on fire. So,
Huh.
you know, if you have 4 nuclear reactors, what happens? They bounce across the ground, and then they're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
we're here. Come get us." Like,
Yeah. Come get us.
you just black
Do an
box them,
inspection and
you
put
know
them
what I
on the
mean?
next plane.
Exactly.
We got some spare reactors for the next one. Wow,
I think it's a good idea.
That's I just had never thought of it from that perspective, right? Because, and this is the problem of having been in the nuclear Navy, is that we have 2 million gallons or 2 million gallons of fuel on an aircraft carrier for the planes.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes, but the aircraft carrier is like, I got these tiny little pellets that are the size of a gummy bear that take me everywhere. Yeah.
Little different.
That seems. Yeah, well, you know what I mean. It doesn't.
Yeah.
The point is that the system is weird in my head. Like, because if those jets had like these small reactors, and they could fly up there forever. How many fighter pilots would have to go? I'm out of. It's not Maverick anymore, because they're like, this dude's gonna run out of fuel, and I'll just chase him to the like gates of hell.
I mean, because the first planes that launch are the refueling planes. So they take F-18s and they have fuel pods on them, and they launch. And interesting fact is that F-18s, when they launch them, they'll load them heavy with ordnance and light on fuel. They'll launch them and then do a midair refueling. Well, if I've got a nuclear reactor that can just make the thrust, okay,
then you're good. What are you worried about? Let's just go. Like, it's fine. You can actually save money. Look, all you liberals that think the military spends too much money, listen up. They can spend less money because they don't even have to launch the refueling plane, because they don't even need it. That thing can fly around for 30 years shooting at shit. It's fine. Bombing little brown children. Now that Biden's president, you're all on board with.
And then the number one ship in the military Sea Lift Command is the Oilers, the Fleet Oilers.
Yeah,
to refuel your ships. And if you've gone to a nuclear Navy, a pure nuclear Navy with a nuclear Air Force, right? You've eliminated refueling planes.
Yeah, they're gone. They don't even exist anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's a great idea, and I think we should really start pushing to make the military nuclear. All of it. I mean, okay, maybe not like tanks and stuff. That's a little dangerous, probably. Like, if they shoot a nuclear reactor with another tank, that might be bad. I'm just guessing.
You can make it electric with a backup generator.
Well, that's fair. You could do that. Yeah, just charge it with nuclear.
Yeah, because you got your micro reactor, the mobile reactor program that the Army's working on. And you can use that as your power supply.
The M1A2 Tesla model. I like it.
Don't throw a rock at it or it will shatter.
Do you know how many people threw a rock at that window of that Cybertruck before that happened?
Oh,
it was like 38 people. Yeah. And then it was like right on camera, right when they were live, just boom, and they're like, oh, that didn't work. Crap. Like, that's just funny. If you throw something at something long enough, it's gonna break. Okay, we're a little over 2 hours now. We'll do one more question from Todd, and then I'll have a final question. So I'm sure he's been listening and kind of giggling once in a while. So you got a final question there, Todd?
Yeah, sure. So going back to, that was a fun conversation, but going back to kind of the political situation today, one thing that you touched on was, say, West Virginia could put in some power plants and actually sell that electricity to other states. What would it look like if you had one governor who really got behind this in a state that they could sell it to their people, and let's say they wanted to be that state that brought on new nuclear reactors and started selling the nuclear energy? Like, what would that look like from a process standpoint? How hard would it be from a regulation standpoint if they could get their state behind it? Coming from Oklahoma, obviously, we're in a situation where as fossil fuels go down, you know what I mean, we could be impacted pretty severely. And I know there's other states like West Virginia that are in the same boat.
So it's interesting because each state is its own animal when it comes to energy, and that's what's fascinating. So, I will start with by saying the states that are actually putting pro-nuclear policies in place: Alaska, Wyoming, Washington State, and Idaho are like the big states that have nuclear projects that are going on, and Utah is actually adjacent to the Idaho projects. So the next nuclear reactor that is going to be licensed to construct in the United States is called the UAMPS project, which is the new scale power module, 12 units, 77 megawatts for each reactor, which puts it up to almost, it's like 800 some odd megawatts, which is a large scale nuclear reactor in the US. And it requires the same amount of personnel to operate it as an equivalent reactor. And it's an advanced design. It's not a generation 4 design by the official definition. So Idaho is behind this. Idaho is very pro-nuclear. The birthplace of nuclear in the United States for power generation really is Idaho. Idaho has a huge nuclear experience. A lot of the first Navy reactors for the submarines and aircraft carriers were all built in Idaho. So Idaho is great for nuclear. And when they can get behind that, when they can get the commercial power going, I think an 800 megawatt reactor is like enough to power Idaho. Like that's enough power, like for the entire state. The problem with the Western states, honestly, is transmission, right? And when I say Western, I'm not talking the West Coast where you've got the really big cities. I'm talking the Western states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming,
Nebraska,
those sparsely populated states. Nebraska shut their reactor down because it was not cost effective, because it's, it produces almost too much power, but it was a smaller reactor, so it wasn't making enough of a profit. But when you're talking these smaller reactor designs, if I can put,
can I ask right quick, when did they shut it down?
Let's see here, 4 or 5 years ago.
It'll be coming back online soon, I bet you. Nebraska has had a 20% increase in population in the last 5 years.
Okay.
20% of their entire population they've got in the last 5 years.
Let's wait that for the fourth conversation to talk about bringing old reactors back online, because that's a fascinating conversation.
All right.
So depending on each state becomes its own flavor. West Virginia is a great state, and I think West Virginia has the awesome opportunity to become an energy epicenter. West Virginia imports energy. They don't export energy. They have more energy they have to purchase their energy because they don't produce enough locally. If they went to nuclear and they were able to build nuclear, they might have to dam up and create reservoirs to be your cooling source for the reactor, but they're not big. And honestly, it worked out great for Virginia with the North Anna Power Station. All the freaking super rich people outside of Fairfax love the Lake Anna. They do, like they
kill all the frogs. We don't care.
But they have a cold side and a hot side, right?
I know. I was kidding.
Yeah,
I was kidding.
But West Virginia, they built power. They built all this power. They could meet the green demands of all the states around them, right? All the states. If you're looking, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, Washington, D.C., Ohio, all those states that surround West Virginia.
One of those is not a state, for all of you people that understand, and it should never be. Carry on.
Yes,
sorry.
The Constitution, yeah. But all those states and the one district, they all have green energy policies that are in place that include nuclear qualified as green energy.
Because it is.
But not every state has that. California doesn't recognize nuclear as green energy. So if you can get these states, if West Virginia builds nuclear, they can then power it. The great thing about West Virginia is that Loudoun County, Virginia, is where 80% of the internet traffic goes to. Amazon and Microsoft have the vast majority of their data centers in those locations. It is literally a stone's throw from the West Virginia border.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the weird shape. And so when I went to speak with the one independent delegate at the time, he said West Virginia is shaped like this, right? And over here, Loudoun County is right there, or right down here somewhere, right? You like that I'm flipping everyone. It's like everybody's like,
I don't care. Like, go for it.
It's that one area where it's just the perfect spot, and there's a bunch of rivers that flow through there that they could do this. They could build the reactors there, send the power north, send the power south, and they're powering these data centers. And by the way, these data centers are so large that they need like 4 AP1000 reactors to power them, which it's called the AP1000 because it's 1,000 megawatts to the grid.
Jesus Christ. Like their power bill, I can't even imagine. I almost feel like, well, maybe that'll be my last question. Yeah. This will be my last question. Is that enough of a power pull for them to have their own reactor on campus for them?
Yes, absolutely.
They could absolutely just have their own reactor on their own campus.
You mean like Disney's legally allowed to do in Florida?
Wait, really? Do they have one?
They don't.
Why?
I don't know, but there's a Florida law that explicitly states that the Disney World complex can build its own nuclear reactor to power Disney.
Just for their own thing.
Just for Disney.
Okay, so
I would totally
Amazon,
there,
Google, these guys could do that, right? They could do that. They can't because of regulatory nonsense. But if it seems to me like they shouldn't have built in Virginia. They should have built in West Virginia. Based on what you say about their building regulatory, all that. But they could build their own reactor, and it would generate. Each one of them could just have their own reactor, and they'd have free power, essentially. Not free, but damn near free compared to what they're paying for.
It would be a support cost for the data center, right? I mean, it would be like the same thing as an air conditioning unit. Right? I pay for an air conditioning unit that keeps everything cool to support the data center where I'm making my money. Well, now I'm making the power that's, providing the power to my data centers. So it's all part of that thing. And I'm going to that, this is a vertical style as opposed to your horizontal. Instead of specializing in one field, if I collect it all together and have that vertical, I have a cradle to grave, I generate my own power, right? To operate my data centers, which provides power to my air conditioning units, and then let's say that, there's a major storm that rolls through. You got a switch yard that you have next to your power center, right? And normally you keep that breaker open to the grid. And then let's say we're going to shut the data center down or go to partial operations. So I go to the grid, provide power to the grid, and, in the event that, the hurricane rolls through and, say we had to shut down a bunch of plants or whatever, and we prevent the Texas issue, right?
Yeah.
If we allowed these individual companies, and I look at steel, I look at crypto, I look at cannabis, I look at, even these data centers, any of these large scales, we talked about the skyscrapers with the greenhouses in them the other time, right?
Which would be great.
But if each one of those has their own power and they can go to a minimum power level, right? If I'm an office building and there's a hurricane comes through and no one's going to work, I don't need to worry about heating and cooling. I don't need to worry about keeping my customers cool. I got my, whatever my records information and sufficient power to keep the building from not having problems. And then I just close the breaker that goes to the city and I provide power to the city on a temporary basis, such that I can help everyone. I mean, I spent a winter in New York. Everyone in New York that has a truck has a plow on the front. And when there's a snowstorm, everyone is a city employee for 3 hours a day, and they plow all the roads.
Because they have to be, because the city, doesn't do their damn job, right, Todd?
I mean, they get all their roads plowed because every Joe New Yorker has a freaking plow. There are 6 plows in my county. When there's a dusting of snow, it shuts the entire place down.
Jesus, that's.
But I also don't expect. I get snow every other year, so I don't stress it.
Yeah, but I also, where I live, like, I mean, when it snows, we're like, oh, it's snow, whatever. Like, we have chains or we have 4-wheel drive. We're fine. Like, I don't understand why the East Coast is a bunch of damn sissy lalas. I don't get it. Like, out here in the West, we're like, oh, well, just drive. Don't be a bitch. Like, it's simple. Like, okay. Well, let's see here. Well, now you got me all wondering. We're going to have to talk about, obviously, like, we're gonna have another episode eventually here. One of the things that I wanted to say before we leave is that I understand that the majority of the problem with nuclear is fear. People are afraid that, like, the thing's gonna blow up. Even my own brother was like, "Well, what about Chernobyl?" And I'm like, okay, well, we can have that discussion, or you can be a good brother and watch the damn show and let the professional explain it to you so that you understand. Other than the fear side, and this will be our final question for this episode, and then Mark and I will schedule for probably sometime next week or whenever. What are the other arguments? What are the biggest arguments you get other than the, oh no, it's scary?
So I break it down into 3, and that's the waste, weapons, and meltdown. Those are the 3 arguments every single time, right? What do we do with the waste is the number 1 argument I get. And when I tell them that the waste is just fuel, then they go into the, well, what about meltdowns? And I say, all right, we can design meltdowns out of them. We know we can do this, and I explain it. And they go, what about weapons? I say, well, all right, the reactors that generated the plutonium for our weapons program and for the Russian weapons program were designed to do that.
Right.
Right? It was their purpose. Mm-hmm. Their purpose was to generate plutonium for nuclear weapons. The plutonium you get from nuclear reactors that operate is not nuclear weapons material. Could you do it? Yes. Would you do it? No. It would be cheaper and safer to build yourself a nuclear reactor designed to make plutonium for nuclear weapons than to go to take spent nuclear fuel, separate the plutonium out under all those crazy radiological and shielding conditions where, if you don't have the right shielding, it's going to kill people in minutes. Right?
Yeah.
And then, and then have to centrifuge that out to separate the uranium-234 and 240 or 239 from the 240 and 241 and 242 to get the right amount, to get the right concentration of uranium-239 or plutonium-239 to make a nuclear weapon. Just build your own freaking special reactor to make your own plutonium. So that's not even a concern. And then the other thing, well, what about uranium? Is okay, well, that's centrifuges. We're not even, okay. So the difference between going from 0.7% to 5% is like, Duplo's level experience, right? When we use, building things, right? Duplo's level experience. Up to 20% is like Legos, but like the basic Legos, not like any of the weird, just all the, the
not the weird funky Legos. We're not building the Death Star. We're just
we're talking the basics, right? And then to go to weapons grade, which is greater than 80 or 90%, you're talking, that level of technology is like building a skyscraper compared to Legos.
Damn.
Right? It's not the same thing. But really,
Right.
but that changes once you get above that 20%. It's like 60%. You're at skyscraper level, and then once you're there, it's just all the way up to 100% is easy, right?
Oh, okay.
But you know, what you have to do for centrifuging is just, and it's a quantity thing too, right?
Mhm.
But even then, when you're taking, you got to convert the stuff, you got to convert your yellow cake into a gas to centrifuge it so you can collect uranium-235 from the uranium-238, and then it's still a blend of uranium-235, uranium-238. And then you have to run that through a different kind of centrifuge that does it better, and then you run it through again and again, and the amount of uranium you have to mine is like almost 200 times what you need to get the uranium-235 to make a uranium bomb. North Korea figured this out and said, you know what? It's even cheaper to build a reactor to make plutonium that's designed to make plutonium than it is to build the centrifuges like Iran is doing to create to get the uranium.
Nice. All right. Well, we are going to leave it there. Todd, why don't you get your grift on? Throw a shout out to your stuff because we didn't know you were going to end up the co-host. That just happened to you. So apologize for that. But yeah, like, what do you got going on, man? Where can people find you?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Obviously, find me at Todd Hagopian on Twitter. That's where I do most of my stuff. And then I've got the Chief Chats podcast that we do a couple times a week. So I appreciate you bringing me on.
All right, man. I appreciate it. All right, Mark, you don't have a grift. You're just doing your own thing. Like, I don't even know what to do there.
You can follow me on Twitter at Schneider, see all my great workout stuff.
Yeah, like he's in the description. He's got the the hashtag Green Nuclear Deal. Definitely like tweet that out or whatever. But he's down in the description. No offense, Todd, you weren't. I didn't know for sure how that was going to turn out. You can like, subscribe, and Magnus, our co-host, had some problems, but he's got a Unity or Die podcast, which is really good. So you guys should check that out. That's also in the description below. And Mark, I guess, well, I mean, we're going to have a bunch of parts of this because we got part 4 now. I have more questions. I always have more questions. Like, you're the guy to talk to. Maybe at some point we can get your wife on here. She's the engineer. Like, my understanding is they're the smart ones. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, she is way smarter than me. So
they always are. That's what's just irritating about them.
She's way smarter than me, but dumb enough to marry me. So
well, yeah. She was like, well, he's not balding, so it'll work.
Yeah.
All right, guys, I appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks.
We'll let the audience know next time we have Mark. I mean, probably next week sometime. This seems to be a fun little thing we're doing. So, all right, peace, people.